We're starting a brand new series this morning, and I'm really excited about it. Mostly because Esther and I have had this kind of in our hearts and in our prayers for several months now, and so I'm just kind of really glad to get some of this like out of my head and out in the open where we can talk about it. But we're titling this series "Setting the Table Differently," which I hope explains a little bit why the sanctuary is set up the way it is this morning. We didn't just want to talk about changes. We wanted to play with them and experiment and experience what it looks like to set the table differently. But before we dive in kind of too deeply into what I mean by that, I do want to give a little background because several things kind of conspired to bring this series to our door. First is this parable that Jesus tells in Luke, which is kind of formative here at Open Table. It's part of where we got our name at OTCC. So if you brought your Bible with you or you read it on an app, you can turn or click to Luke 14 because I'd really like to talk through kind of this entire story a little bit before we shift gears. So it's only a few verses that are important to us, but this parable doesn't just kind of happen in a void. This isn't one that just Jesus just kind of teaches with a whole list of other parables. This one is kind of prompted by social circumstances. So the moment kind of inspires this story. So it's really important that we get this entire kind of narrative. So it says, one Sabbath day, Jesus went to eat dinner in the home of a leader of the Pharisees, and the people were watching him closely. There was a man there whose arms and legs were swollen. Jesus asked the Pharisees and experts in religious law, is it permitted to heal people on the Sabbath day or not? And when they refused to answer, and then it goes on. I'm going to pause for 1 second. This is good by itself, but the NIV actually says it better. It says that Jesus kind of asked his question, and it says, but they remained silent. So quick survey in the room. How many of you would rather have like all your teeth pulled than get caught in a truly awkward situation? Does anybody like hate awkward? Like awkward is the devil. Like I'm the type person who, and forgive me if you've ever seen me doing this, but if I bump into somebody I haven't seen for a while in like Home Depot or Walmart, I will turn into a spy to avoid them. Like I will crawl. I hate that, hey, how you doing? You look good. That empty, like I hate those awkward moments. I love people, and if we have time to talk, I will always stop and talk to you. But if it's just that in passing awkward thing, oh, that's like itches on my skin. I can't do it. But what's worse is like the tense awkwardness. Have you ever been in a room and like two people start arguing and like a married couple starts arguing with each other in like a really uncomfortable and deep way, and everybody else in the room is like, you guys want to step out for a minute, or we could step out? Like that awkwardness, like that is painful awkwardness. And I picture this dinner party being a really awkward affair. I don't think we get it unless it makes us feel really uncomfortable. I think what's happening here is mostly uncomfortable. It's already weird because Jesus is eating with a bunch of the people that normally give him a hard time. These are the people that are always questioning his authority and trying to get him tangled up in theological questions and just messing with it all the time. And so just the fact that he's there is already a little weird, that he's hanging out with the Pharisees, having dinner with them, and everything that transpires afterwards just makes it weirder. First, Jesus recognizes this guy who seems to be suffering from some kind of illness that's causing him to swell, possibly congestive heart failure or something like that. But it has the feel of a setup. It has the feel of he's hanging out with Pharisees, and the Pharisees bring this guy that has a very obvious and visible physical issue. Kind of the elephant in the room. You guys ever heard that phrase, the elephant in the room? Like that. This is kind of the elephant in the room. That thing that everybody knows is there, and it's so big you could not know it's there. But no one wants to officially draw attention to it. Nobody wants to go, hey, what's with the dude with the swollen hands and feet? You know, that nobody wants to be that person. And so everybody just kind of ignores it and lets it sit there being awkward. And I think that's kind of what happens here, except Jesus just like walks headfirst into the awkwardness. And I love that piece. He's just like, he sees the guy, he knows what's happening. He's like, so let's just talk about this then. What do you think is best here? And he calls everyone's attention to the tension that's already in the room with this question, and instead of kind of alleviating, because usually when there's an elephant in the room and you talk about it, it gets better. Like now that we're talking about it, it's out, we can all talk freely about it, the tension goes down, the uncomfortable, the awkwardness goes down. Not what happens here. Jesus draws attention to this guy, and the tension just kind of thickens because no one answers. No one says anything. They all just sit there in silence. And I don't know, for me, silence is like painful. Like if I'm in a room and I ask a question, nobody answers, it's like compulsive for me to start filling the empty space with words. I don't even have to make sense. I just have to say words because silence is the devil. And so Jesus does that. He's like, so what do you guys think? Is it good to heal on the Sabbath? And everybody just goes dead silent. And they just sit in this awkward, uncomfortable silence. And I bring this up I stress this awkwardness for a couple of reasons. First is because we're sitting at tables having a church service, which is not normal. And that can create some awkwardness. You have people across from you and sitting with you that don't normally look you in the face. And that can be weird. And that's okay. The awkwardness is okay. Ultimately, the religious leaders in this story weren't upset that Jesus was healing somebody. They were upset at when Jesus was healing somebody. In other words, it isn't the time for this. This isn't when we do this. There's a time for healing. The Sabbath is not it. Just like there's a time for sitting at tables, and this is not it. When before church, I was up here at the front, and Kayla came up to me. She was like, "Why is the room set up like this?" And I was like, "We're doing things different for a couple weeks." And she goes, "So we're not eating then?" I was like, "No, we're not eating." She's like, and it has that feel of, hey, there's a time for this. There's a time to sit at tables, and this is not it. This is church. We sit in rows at church, and that's kind of what the religious leaders are doing here. They're like, there's a time for healing. There's a time for doing those things, and this is not it. This is the Sabbath. This is the day for resting. There's a certain way we do things. There's a time and place for tables, and this is not it. Which brings me to the second reason I draw so much attention to the awkwardness in this morning's passage. It's that I think God is the master of awkwardness. I really do. I think God intentionally leans into awkwardness. I think he's the kind of God that will make you run out of wine at a wedding party just to see what you'll do. He's the kind of God that will gather a huge crowd and then tell you to feed them just to see what you'll do. He'll ask you to walk out in front of a whole bunch of people and get dunked in a pool just so you can announce to everyone around you that you're a follower of Jesus. He is the God of awkward situations. Awkwardness is one of his favorite tools. And so the sooner we get comfortable in uncomfortable, the more effective we're going to be for the kingdom. But in our passage today, Jesus walks into an awkward dinner, immediately draws attention to the elephant in the room that everyone else is trying to ignore. And he makes everything way more uncomfortable by pointing out everyone else's hypocrisy. This is what he says. But they were silent. This is after he healed him. It says, so taking hold of the man, he healed him and sent him away. It says, then he asked everyone, if one of you has a child or an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath day, you will not immediately pull it out? And they had nothing to say. So they still sit in this awkward side. Basically, Jesus says, don't judge me. You know for a fact, as valuable as this Sabbath is to you, you guys act like this Sabbath, you cannot profane the Sabbath whatsoever. And if your son fell in a hole, tell me you wouldn't grab him. Tell me you wouldn't ditch your conviction in 1 second to save someone. Come on. Like he calls them out on their hypocrisy. You know darn well you do the same thing. Your convictions would fly out the window in a half a second if there was something meaningful that had to be done. And Jesus considers healing this guy that is afflicted that meaningful. So he just says right out loud, you guys are hypocrites, and we all know it. Let's just talk about it. And nobody says anything. And kids will do this to you. I don't know if you guys have ever been, like kids will create awkwardness in like a half a second. You ever have one of those moments when you're trying to kind of project your Sunday morning holy self, like your praise Jesus, the Lord is mighty self, and someone starts talking about a TV show and how inappropriate it is and how horrible it is, and you just nod. You're like, that's awful. Like, that's just, I can't believe they put that stuff on TV. And your kid walks up and goes, hey, you watch that show. And you're like, well, I mean, I'm just like researching how evil things are. Like, I don't like watch it. Like, the kids will put you on the spot like in a half a second, like just immediately make things awkward, and you're just stuck, in the weirdness. But the final reason I bring up how awkward this passage is, and we're going to be drawing back to it over and over again, is because this isn't the end of the weird moments in this dinner party. And the reason I think that's important to this series is because we're going to be talking about doing some awkward things. I'm going to be asking you to do some awkward things. We're going to be talking about money, and that always gets awkward. We're going to be talking about serving in areas that you aren't used to serving, and that can get awkward. We're going to be talking about inviting people to church and building relationships with people that are intentional and kingdom-driven, and that can get awkward. In other words, we're going to be talking about increasing the level of awkwardness in this room and in your life for the next few weeks. And I want us all to know that God is the God of awkward. God does not function in a way that decreases the awkwardness in your life to make things easy and smooth. God has a tendency to do the exact opposite, to tell you to do something that you're really uncomfortable doing, to tell you to talk to somebody when you don't really like talking to people. That's the way God works, and a little discomfort isn't going to kill us. So let's continue with this awful dinner party. Jesus watches everybody playing the totally normal kind of status games. In their culture, there was a particular seating that signified certain things. Who was the most important person in the room? Everybody knew by where they were sat. And it wasn't like established by vote or anything, public or easily recognizable. It just sort of happened based on who was talking to whom and who was making the better impression that night. If you got engaged in a really good conversation with the host, he would want to keep you close because he was enjoying the conversation. So you'd get sat more up toward the head of the table, and he would want somebody important that he might be able to name drop, closer to him. So later he could say, I was talking to Bill the other night at my dinner. So they would want Bill close, and so this creates like a weird environment where everybody is jockeying for the best seat. Everybody's doing that, trying to look as good as they can and trying to look as smart as they can and trying to put their best foot forward so that they can land in the best seat. And then it would be remembered later that such and such was up at the head of the table. And so Jesus is kind of watching this play out. Have you ever watched a really awkward social scene from outside? And you're like last night my son got married. And so weddings are the best. Watching white people dance is the best. Like it is the most fun, and there's just a lot of head banging because that's all they know how to move. And so it was a blast. And when you're outside of it, it's hilarious to watch these young people have a good time. But that's kind of what Jesus is doing, only in this really horrible social status game that everybody's playing and everybody's like schmoozing and doing the thing while Jesus just kind of watches. And everybody knows it's horrible. That's the worst part. Like everybody in the room knows this is fake. Like, and that's the worst thing when you're part of something that everybody knows is fake, but nobody wants to be the one to go, this is awful. Why do we do this? Like, nobody wants to call it out. So everybody doesn't want to be ostracized. So they just play along in this game that everybody kind of knows is horrible because they don't want to risk social obscurity. Nobody wants to set the table differently, in other words. And of course, Jesus just has to call it out into the room and make things more uncomfortable. And this is when someone in there, so Jesus he's like, hey, when you come to a party, don't do this. Like he just kind of talks to the room. Like, don't jockey for the best seat. That's ridiculous. Take the lowest seat and maybe somebody will ask you to scoot up. But this is crazy what's happening right here. He just draws attention to it. And this is when somebody actually starts to push back. And at least that's what I think is happening here, is this guy pushes back Jesus. And that's what prompts Jesus to share this parable. So in this morning's message, right after Jesus draws everyone's attention to how ridiculous they were acting in this room, scrambling for the best status position, somebody snaps back. And they say, when one of those at the table with him heard this, he said to Jesus, "Blessed is the one who eats at the feast in the kingdom of God." So what seems to happen here is that Jesus is pointing out some of the foolishness of this dinner party, and someone responds, "Yeah, if you want a perfect dinner party, you pretty much got to wait till heaven. Like, blessed is the one that gets to eat with God, because that's about the only place you don't get the terrible status games," which prompts Jesus to tell this story that is apparently an allegory of what exactly a kingdom of God dinner party might actually look like. He says this: Jesus replied, "A certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servants to tell those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is now ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, 'I have just bought a field and I must go and see it. Please excuse me.' Another said, 'I have just bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me.' Still another said, 'I just got married, so I can't come.' The servant came back and reported this to his master. Then the owner of the house became angry and ordered his servant, 'Go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame.' 'Sir,' the servant said, 'what you ordered has been done, but there is still room.' Then the master told his servants, 'Go out into the roads and the country lanes and compel them to come, so that my house will be full. And I tell you, not one of those who are invited will taste of my banquet.'" Now this parable has a kind of a powerful prophetic interpretation, especially considering its original audience, because the kingdom of God was about to make a dramatic move from applying primarily to one people who were originally invited via Abraham 2,000 years earlier. And then now that Messiah is here and the party is ready, they decide not to show up. And so the Father decides to invite those who were not originally invited, who were outside, meaning us, the entire Gentile church. So despite its kind of prophetic application for the moment that it was given, there are some great elements of this story that have always inspired me. And first is the fact that I love that the party is attended by people who don't necessarily fit into a party like this. In short, I have a heart for people that don't necessarily fit into church. If I'm honest, I'm a church guy. Like I'm a churchy guy. I've been faithful to church for over 30 years. I've always served in church in some capacity. I mostly listen to worship music. I read my Bible, stand for Christian values, all the things. Like by all accounts, I'm mostly a churchy guy. But I've also worked construction my entire life. And I've worked for people and with people who are not Christian. And I'll be honest, I love people. And I completely understand why some people don't get along well with church. And I've always had a heart and wish we could create a space at the table for them to feel welcomed and comfortable in. And so I've always had this heart. And I feel like this parable talks about a table that's open to people who don't necessarily fit in at this kind of party. And so I've always had a heart for that. So I've always lived in this tension of being pretty much totally churched and churchy, but always wanting to do church in a normal, ordinary, non-churchy way for non-churchy people, real people. And I think this parable kind of captures that tension well. That's really only the surface part of the parable, the ethos, if you will. The parts that I want to draw out today are more specific. It says, "At the time of the banquet, he sent his servants to tell those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is now ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, 'I've bought a field, have to see it.' The second said, I bought 5 yoke of oxen, I have to test them. And the other one said, 'I just got married and I can't come.'" Excuses is basically what happens here. I'd planned on spending some time kind of slamming and making fun of excuses this morning. Because we come up with some doozies for why we miss church, why we avoid going to church altogether, why we avoid reaching out and making friends and meeting new people and building a relationship. But something jumped out at me that I think is far more serious out of this. And so I just want to kind of draw out a couple things, a couple portions of this parable. And I don't even necessarily want to give a lot of commentary on them. I just want to kind of point them out, and then I'm going to let you talk about them at your tables. First is that these are really good excuses. These are not lame excuses. These are important things. To attend this type of party in the first century generally meant traveling and staying for like a week. Like when you went to this kind of party, it was a week-long ordeal. This wasn't like one of our parties that lasts an hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever. This is an investment that you have to make. And they weren't really scheduled on the calendar the way we schedule things for like a particular day or even a particular week. You just knew after harvest, such and such is having a wedding feast. And so weather mattered. When you got the crops in mattered, which often depended on when you could get, harvest help, from other people. A lot of things kind of played in that you couldn't really time down to the minute. And so you would send an invitation out for fall. Like, we're going to have a feast in the fall. And that's all you really knew. And then they would, when the harvest was in, when the steer had been slaughtered and prepared and everything was ready, and you were now in a position to host the event, then you would send out and go, the party's ready, it's time to come. And you didn't really know when that was coming. You didn't really know when you might, if you were close, you'd kind of keep tabs. It looks like John's about got his harvest in, so the party will probably be coming up soon. Like, you kind of knew, but not like we do. You don't lock things in. They didn't work on the calendar, and definitely not on the clock the way we do. And so this is a week-long feast that you had to travel to, and you didn't really know when it was going to hit. So being in the middle of like a major business purchase, I bought a piece of land and I have to, close this deal. That's a valid excuse to miss this kind of party. To buy, 5 yoke of oxen, that's like 10 oxen. That's like a big deal. And you want to get them, you got to get them in, and you got to get, them into the barns and fed and taken care of. That's a valid reason to miss this kind of thing. You just got married yourself. And when they got married in that culture, you took a year off, which is awesome. Like, your honeymoon wasn't like a week in Jamaica. You took a year off to establish your house. And people covered for you for like a year, which is great. And so this is these are good excuses. My wife, when she was young, she had a lot of like would-be suitors, and she was horrible at turning guys down. We make fun of her all the time. She literally had a guy ask her out, and she said, "I can't. I'm washing my hair." She actually used the washing. I can't go out. I'm washing my hair. That poor guy. It like breaks my heart every time I think about it. To get the "I'm washing my hair" line. But these excuses that Jesus puts in his story are not, "I'm washing my hair." These are real things. These are good excuses. The people at this dinner party that Jesus is telling this story to probably wouldn't have sneered at the excuses. They probably would have went, "Man, bad luck for this guy." It's like everybody is to throw a party on a time when, like, what a horrible coincidence that everybody is legitimately busy while you're trying to throw a wedding feast or you're trying to throw this big party. It's bad timing for this guy. They wouldn't have automatically assumed these other people are jerks. They would have said, "Yeah, you can't come if you just bought 10 oxen. You can't come if you just bought a field." So the excuses are legitimate. This is not, petty. So the first thing I want to recognize is that the excuses that often keep us from the presence of God are not all bad excuses. And that's spooky. Most are actually great excuses. Most of the reasons we have for missing church, or for not connecting in a small group, or for not doing life with other people, for not engaging the kingdom of God more fully, are not really excuses at all. They're reasons. A word that draws its meaning from reason and logic. They're real reasons. But just because the reasons are valid doesn't mean they don't come with a cost. A valid reason for missing the presence of God is still missing the presence of God. And the second thing I want to draw out, or at least draw our attention to, is the fact that none of these invited guests would have had any way to know that the other guests were also ditching the feast. In other words, when you hear this parable, it's easy to recognize the trend. We see that it's a movement. We see that things are trending away from this party. There's obviously something dramatic happening that orchestrated all of this, but none of the guests would have known that. They would not have known that they are a part of a movement, that their absence, they would have assumed their absence is barely felt. They would assume that their absence is not that big of a deal. As far as each of these guests know, they just have a valid reason to miss, and it's not that big a deal. The fact that they are part of a trend and a movement would have been lost on them. Now, these two realities combine to create something that to me is terrifying. When you have a completely logical reason to, let's say, miss church or not be in a small group or not connect with other believers, when you have a legitimate, valid reason to do that, and a huge number of other people are making the same decision at the same time, and they have a very valid reason to do that, then horrible things can happen without anybody realizing it. And I think this is one of the reasons the church is slowly dying in America. All the numbers are going the wrong direction for the church in America. So the next point of this parable that I really want to look at together is kind of the transition point of the story. This would be the denouement, if you want a fun word, for this story. And I kind of want to look at this because this is the one that really motivates this series, this point in the story. It says, then the servants came back and reported to their master. So everybody has turned him down. We've got legitimate reasons to miss. We're not going to be able to be there. And the servants come back and report to the master. And it says, then the owner of the house became angry and ordered his servants, go out quickly in the streets and alleys in the town and bring the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. When we first started Open Table, one of the questions we wrestled with was why? Why? Why do we need another church? Why does there need to be one more church? And what does this church have to offer? Because I don't necessarily feel like I have something absolutely crazy special to say that the entire world needs to hear. I don't feel like I have that burden. I love studying the scripture together with you guys. I love preaching. But with the swipe of your thumb, you can access the best messages on the planet. Like, and not just living today. There are people who have taken like all of some of the greatest preachers in the past who wrote like full manuscripts, and they just read them in gorgeous voices. And so it's like you're sitting there listening to this guy preach. Like, and you can find the best messages anywhere with the swipe of a thumb now. It's in your pocket. And I love worship. I love playing worship music. But on the device in your pocket or purse, you have access to the most amazing bands anywhere playing incredible worship music. You can easily access countless study helps and devotionals. You can compare translations. You can turn your memory verses into fancy little pictures so that you can post them on social media. Like you can do all of that. I mean, think about that. Like, it used to be to look holy, you had to at least get dressed up and show up at church on Sunday. Like, you had to at least show up and smile and say, God bless you. Like, you used to have to do that if you want to look holy. Now you can do it in like 90 seconds with your thumb. You can make a cool looking picture into a memory verse and post it. And look how holy you look. And you didn't even have to do anything. There's not even any investment. It's great. So we ask the question, why another church? And part of the answer is right here in this passage, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but the main reason is community. We believe people need people. You can't really have community, real authenticity, real relationship on a screen. We need to gather people. Because of this, we avoided technology completely for the early couple years. We took an audio recording of the sermon. Oftentimes it was just me hitting record on my phone and sitting it in front of me. And we took an audio recording mostly so that the people serving in kids ministry didn't have to miss the message if they didn't want. We weren't really doing it to put out online and to spread our message. We didn't want people to have to sacrifice to serve the kids, and so we recorded it for them so that they could listen to it. But our focus was going to be real presence, looking in the face of another human, real fellowship, real human contact. And then COVID happened. And I think it kind of exponentially sped up something that was already happening in the culture. A movement that we were already trending toward. People were already moving away from regular church attendance. We were talking about at our table how Sundays and Wednesdays used to be protected in our culture. Like, we were spoiled. Like, nobody scheduled anything on Sunday. Schools didn't schedule anything on Wednesdays because they knew you had youth group. And Sundays, they knew you had church. And so you'd have a hard time finding a business open if you needed something, let alone having to worry about work or getting your kids to a game. Like, those things didn't exist for a long, long time. We were spoiled, and now that's gone. And there was a trend moving away from engagement already. And COVID just sped that up. I mean, there was already people, watching online some of the big mega churches like that. There was a trend toward that. But people were moving towards less engagement already. More convenient ways to check off the I've done my spiritual duties box for the week. There was other ways to do it. But COVID kind of forced every church on the planet really to find a way to get online as quick as possible. And it also made watching church rather than going to church not only an option but feel kind of normal. One of the ways. It's now one of the ways. And it made going to church in your bedroom or in your living room okay and normal. And this was a game changer. And pretty much every church on the planet, like I said, is trying to figure out how to navigate that world. And they still are. We're still trying to figure out, okay, now we have this new thing and we have to figure out. And I haven't even acknowledged my OFAM. I know you guys are out there. Yeah, there's quite a few of you out there. I feel bad for you guys. I'm not picking on you guys today. I hope you know that. My whole family was like, geez, I can't believe I missed church today of all days. The day Chris is picking on us. Leslie, so awkward. Yeah. Hey, guys. I see you out there. Love you. But this is a game changer, and every church is now trying to navigate it. We're part of a collection of churches, and that's all we talk about. Is how we navigate this new dynamic. And I think it's really important to recognize there's a distinction we have to pick up on, that COVID didn't cause this shift. It just accelerated it. We were already moving in that direction. If COVID was the problem, then we could expect to get back to normal. If COVID was just a weird thing that happened, then COVID would have gotten over, we would have gone back to the way things were, everything would have been normal. But if COVID just accelerated something that was already happening, then the church needs to ask the question that it has had to answer for countless times over the last 2,000 years. And that is, how do we reach people and advance the kingdom of God and spread the gospel and disciple people and be the church? In short, how do we fulfill the Great Commission in this new environment? Because things have changed. The church started out as a small group of people trying to kind of get a foothold in the Roman world, while at the same time just holding on for dear life until Jesus came back. Because that earliest group of Christians assumed Jesus was coming back in their lifetime. And you can hear it in some of Paul's earliest writings, like, just hold on, just hang on. Jesus is coming back. They knew he was coming back in their lifetime. Then after about 40 years passed, they started realizing that first generation of church leaders were going to die, and the focus became getting their testimonies down in writing. And so there was a season when getting that stuff on paper, because they realized we're going to lose this generation and we need their eyewitness accounts. And so writing became the big focus for a short amount of time. So there was a transition into a new environment. And as they grew and they kind of drew the ire of Rome shortly thereafter, they became a heavily persecuted community, functioning mostly underground, with secret hand signals. You guys know the ichthus, the little Jesus fish? That started out as a hidden signal. Like, you would cross your fingers, and it was a way of telling somebody, I'm a Christian. Because if you said it out loud, you could be arrested or killed. And so they had these little signals, and if you looked down and saw somebody with basically an ichthus, a fish, on their fingers, you knew they were a Christian. And you knew that you could say secret codes. So they had secret codes and things. And part of the dynamic of this era was you didn't dare bring your church leaders into one place where all of your leadership could be arrested or killed at one time. And that majorly kind of hindered the development of theology and the agreement on some theological issues, because you couldn't get your leaders together. So they're trying to do the slow work of communicate via letter, which, carried by people on foot, to do any conversation. And that's how they lived for 100 years or so. And then everything changed, and they found themselves not, protected by Rome all of a sudden. And so for the very first time in history, you have church councils happening. And they're making big theological decisions because you're able to, for the first time in history, get all your leaders in one room together where they can debate and argue and do what they got to do to kind of figure out what they feel like God says. And a whole new era took over. And they had to navigate this new way of doing things. And they had to do that on and on and on and on and on. In other words, church history can be viewed as a series of shifts and adjustments to figure out how to fill the table in an ever-changing environment. And the thing that I've always loved about this parable is the fact that the host plans a feast, invitations are out, the harvest is in, the steer is slaughtered and prepared, the feast is ready, and things changed. Everything changed. COVID happened. Society started doing things differently. Now kids' games are on Sundays. Lives are busier and busier where every moment of rest or just regrouping from a long week gets more precious and hard to give up. Like, I only have so many days to kind of mow my own lawn. Like, I can't give up another one. Like, just every moment gets more and more valuable. Things changed, and the man with this banquet had a choice to make. I can stick with my original plan and eat alone, or I can shift and set the table differently. And I actually got this phrase a couple months ago where, like I said, part of a network of just independent churches. It's more of just relationship with other churches called Linked International Network of Churches. And I was talking to one of the directors about this new online dynamic and even more about kind of everyone's crazy busy schedules. And I told him how our original intention was to be a relational church where we spent real time together, and how hard genuine kind of authentic community, how hard that is in this environment. It's getting harder and harder for people to even make it to church. And when they do, it's hard to build relationships in that space when you only get a few minutes here and there. So I asked how can you use the space we currently have available to genuinely connect people and be the church? And his answer was, you have to set the table differently. And that's all he said. He didn't tell me what that meant. So he just left it hanging in my head like a bomb that I went home and set the table differently. So Esther and I started talking, how do we set the table differently? This phrase has been kind of burning in my brain ever since. What does it mean to set the table differently? As we kind of move into a post-Christian society where we're not just a protected class that can automatically assume things are going to be handed to us. What does it mean to do that? Just what the church has done over and over again for 2,000 years, to shift and adjust, to set the table differently. Through endless cultural changes and social upheavals, how do we do that in our context? And I'll be honest, I don't have a clear answer. I don't have a 4-point plan yet, but I do think I do think there's an answer. And I don't think we can fix all of the 2022 church problems by putting tables in the sanctuary. I don't think that. This is not permanent. I'm not trying to say this is not the fix. And so that's why this is the way we're going to do it from now on. No. But I do want to wrestle with that in this series. I want all of us to wrestle with that, because the main thing that has always drawn me back to this passage, after having his invited guests and all their reasons for not attending, and after going and rounding up a whole new crew of people, not the typical guest stock, but still all the people who are available, the master's servants say this. After the servants had done this, he reported, there is still room for more. This verse haunts me. We've never been about the numbers here at OCC. I can honestly say never once in the entire life of this church have I counted how many people are here. Never once have I counted heads. Our goal was always to build community of people who loved each other and loved Jesus and strengthened each other so that we could go out into the world and do ministry. So we could go out into the world stronger and able to impact the world around us. The goal has never been to build a big organization that focuses mostly on how to be a bigger organization. Like, that's never been our focus. So we're not a growth culture church where the focus has been about growing. But there's room for more. There's still room for more. I don't know how many more. I think we all know instinctively and will know instinctively when we reach the point where like this is about all we can handle. And to add more would somehow take away from the community. There does reach that point where to add more people kind of takes away from the connection and community. I think we'll know when that is, but we're not there yet. There's room for more. There's still room at the table. In Jesus' parable, the host could have settled. He could have just rejoiced that the entire party hadn't fallen apart. At least we have somebody. For a minute there, it looked like there was going to be nobody. I'm glad we have somebody. When the original guest bailed, he could have just shut down the party. And at this point, he could have said, well, at least I'm still having a party. At least it didn't all go to waste. At least we have somebody. But he didn't do that. That's not what happened. Once the host heard that there was room for more, he immediately sent his people out to do more work. If there's room at the table, then there's more work to do. So this master said, go out into the country lanes behind the hedges and urge anyone you find to come so that the house will be full. I don't know what full is at OTCC. I don't. I just know we're not there yet, which means there's more work to do. But the question I'd love to wrestle with is, what about your life? Is your table full? Have you loved everyone that you can love? Have you served everyone you can serve? Do you give all that you can give? Is your table full? Do you have all the people in your life that you can handle? And please remember, the host in this story doesn't make his decision based on that he had everything he needed. Because we do that. I have all the people I need. Well, that wasn't the question. Do you have all the people you can handle? He made his decision based on how many could fit. So I'm not asking if you have all the people in your life to make you happy. I have enough people to make me happy. I have everyone I need. Because this isn't about you. I'm asking if you have all the people who can fit. If you had to answer to God today for your life, would you be able to say that your table was full? I honestly believe that we stand at kind of a pivotal point in church history. There's literally millions of people who used to attend church regularly that no longer do. And they all have reasons, not excuses, but reasons. Genuine, valid reasons. And I don't think any of them realize necessarily that they're part of kind of a mass exodus that's happening from church. They just know that they're busy this Sunday. They bought a new piece of land they need to inspect. They have oxen they need to test, and so on. Each individually have a legitimate reason to miss, and all of those individual reasons are creating a trend and a movement away from church. And according to this passage, we have a part in fixing that. The master said, go quickly out into the streets and alleys and towns and invite. Go out into the country lanes and behind the hedges and urge everyone you find to come. I've always struggled with growth, church growth culture. And I've never liked the idea of the sole purpose of existing being to grow bigger and bigger. But I don't think that our table is full yet. And if you feel like every person that's supposed to be part of OTCC is here, then feel free to disregard anything I'm saying. But I don't think that's true. I think there are people who need to be here. I think there's more room at the table, and that means that we need to get them here. We need to go according to this parable. I also don't believe that your table is full, or mine. I think there's more that God wants to do with you and with me. I think there's more room at your table, which means you need to get excited about what God is doing. Like we said last week, you need to find your faith. If you didn't watch that message, you should. If you've misplaced it, you need to go and find it. Because we need you to have it. We need you to go. Whatever that means at your table, we need you to go. If that means you need to serve, then go. If that means you need to join a small group, then go. If that means building godly relationships with people at work, then go. It may mean doing things differently. It may mean letting some stuff go. It may mean picking up some new stuff, but it's time to go. So the way that I would love to end this message is just by inviting the Holy Spirit to lead us. There's a story where Peter's been out fishing all night. He's been doing what he does all night long and hasn't caught anything. Things weren't working. And he's coming into shore after a busted night of fishing, and Jesus is there. And Jesus says, try it different. Throw the net off the other side of the boat. And I don't know if you've ever done the math, but if there's no fish under this side of the boat, then there shouldn't be any fish under this side of the boat. I don't know. It didn't really make sense. And Peter, if you breathe some emotion into it, he's even like, we've been fishing all night, but if you say so. Like, I always read sarcasm into that. Fine. Like, this is ridiculous. What am I doing? And that's all Jesus said was do it different. Do something different. Change something up. If it's not working, set the table differently. And Peter throws the net over the other side and he brings in the biggest catch he'd ever seen. The boat was breaking. They had to call in help to get it up. They set the table differently and things changed. And so I don't know what that means at Open Table, but I know we need to think about it. We need to talk about it. We need to figure it out.